I saw this guy and I had to turn the van around and check him out here on the Rhode Island-Connecticut border. This homemade roadside attraction actually is a good omen for my travel plans. Here sits Farmer Jack. He wore his mask but didn't get vaxxed. The reason I think that was a good omen is that I'm heading to Route 66, so I'm anticipating seeing a lot of quirky roadside attractions. My goal is to visit 2 states I haven't been to, Missouri and Kansas, and I noticed that Route 66 runs right through both states, so that's where I'm headed. This is a cemetery in Granby, Connecticut. I'm looking for the grave of Daniel Hayes. Here are some Hayeses, but those would be his descendants. Daniel had a bizarre story from way back in 1707 when he was 22 years old. For some unknown reason, Daniel decided to cut the tail off of a dog belonging to some Native Americans. The tribe was passing through this area on their way back to Canada. Daniel's mistreatment of the dog led to the Native Americans capturing Daniel and making him run the gauntlet, which means they all took turns beating and whipping him. The tribe then decided that they would take Daniel back to Canada as their captive and use him as a slave. On their way back to Canada, the tribe stopped in the village of another tribe for rest and supplies, and while they were there, according to Daniel, some Native American children, or little savages as he called them, decided to tickle his feet with feathers as Daniel lay on the ground, tied up, trying to sleep. Daniel lost his temper and kicked the children into the campfire, and he immediately thought the tribe would kill him for doing that. But to his surprise, they gave him a pat on the back. So, cutting a dog's tail off is unforgivable, but kicking children into a fire is completely understandable. So they get back to Canada, and Daniel is assigned to be the slave of an old widowed squaw woman who lost her husband and son, and for 5 years Daniel served her every need as her slave, and he described it as not an unpleasant existence, but he did miss the comforts of home. Eventually the old squaw died, and Daniel was sold to a French fur trapper who allowed Daniel to buy his freedom back by working for him. Daniel Hayes eventually made it back to Granby, Connecticut after earning his freedom, where he married and had children, and one of his great-grandchildren became President Rutherford B. Hayes. Now, somebody made a newer headstone for Daniel, but spelled his name wrong. It's Hayes, H-A-Y-E-S. So it must have been a gift to the Hayes family. His descendants still live here in Granby, and they're members of the Historical Society. I'm sure they appreciated the thought, but the misspelling is cringy. It must have been an awkward thank you. I usually drive right by this reservoir and the interesting structure here in western Connecticut, but I'll be stopping for almost anything that catches my eye. This turret is the gatehouse of the dam, which is where all the pumps and valves are. It was built in the 1930s, but I feel like I'm in medieval England on a drawbridge. Stunning. I'm in downtown Winsted, Connecticut, looking for a particular diner. There it is, tucked in there. The building was just vacated a few months ago. They decided to move their business into a larger building with a fancier menu. Look at those wood stools and the tile floor. Looks all original. Here's what the diner looked like before it was abandoned. It was built in 1931 during the Great Depression. Like most of these old diners, it was manufactured elsewhere and then shipped here. This one was made in a diner factory in New Rochelle, New York. And these diners were shaped like a railroad dining car. There was a giant hot dog attached to the corner here. I guess it was removed. There's Mr. Hot Dog, thrown in the back like he doesn't matter. I bet every day he made somebody smile as they drove by the diner. I hope somebody buys this place and restores it. This is a slice of 20th century American history right here. I'm just a few doors down from the diner, and there's the Museum of Tort Law, which sounds boring as hell, but when I checked it out on the internet, it actually looked interesting. But it's closed, so we'll have to come back another time. It's a coincidence that my next stop happens to be law-related. We're looking for the Ashley House, which during the colonial era employed slaves. Here it says it's a private residence, but there's also a sign indicating it's the Ashley House, so I guess it's okay to come and look at it. One slave in particular lived here named Elizabeth, and when she was 7 years old, she was given as a wedding gift to the young couple that lived here. Imagine giving a 7-year-old child as a wedding gift. That's sick. Anyway, Elizabeth was strong-willed, and she was scarred from beatings that were meant for other slaves when she would intervene and defend them. She must have been bright, too, because when she heard someone recite the Massachusetts Constitution about all men being born free and equal, she decided to get herself a lawyer. And she sued for her freedom and won, which was the beginning of the end of slavery in Massachusetts. That was in 1780, almost 100 years before the Civil War was fought to free all the slaves in this country. Wow, look at that gorgeous colonial-era house. I gotta check it out. It has slats on the door. I've never seen that before. I bet they wish they had slaves to help out with this big house. We're still in Sheffield, Massachusetts, and there's something very unique here. In 1969, some strange lights in the sky were seen by about 40 people in this town, and a boy named Tom Reed claimed that he and his family were taken aboard a UFO. The people who saw the UFO couldn't stop talking about it. Children who saw it drew pictures of the UFO obsessively. Tom Reed, who was 9 years old at the time, had trouble describing being aboard the UFO. It was otherworldly with strange lighting and odd shapes. Tom eventually had this memorial built to commemorate the UFO encountered here in Sheffield. The story has been featured in news articles and shows like Unsolved Mysteries. It's certainly possible. Here's a plaque signed by the governor of Massachusetts. This incident was factually upheld and deemed historically significant. Well then, I guess it's official. There were aliens in Massachusetts. What a pleasant little area, complete with UFO commemorative benches. This flying saucer-looking plaque is from the History Channel show Ancient Aliens, declaring the incident historically true. I guess they haven't been back to visit this planet, and I don't blame them. It's a shit show. I expect to see some giant chairs on Route 66, but until we get there, this library is giving us some giant chair practice. Ooh, it's covered in pointy bumps. Maybe they don't want people relaxing on it. You stay. Good girl, Shrimpy. Time to pose. Don't jump. We're in the Hudson Valley area of New York, which was settled by the Dutch. And since I've been on an architecture kick lately, I wanted to check out this beautiful Dutch-style house from the colonial era. It's the Cornelius Mueller house, and the Muellers lived here for generations. It's a beauty. I've always been fascinated by brick houses. I don't care if it's raining. I had to check out these Victorian-era houses. This is the city of Hudson, New York. Lions' heads carved into the door. I don't think these houses were painted these bright colors in the Victorian era. That was a conservative time. People are living in works of art. I'm spending the night in the village of Catskill. There's the Catskill region and the Catskill Mountains and the town of Catskill. I boondocked in the Walmart parking lot here about 6 months ago. So it was a pleasant night boondocking in Catskill, and this morning we're hiking up to Pratt Rock. This is steep. A year ago today, I broke my ankle hiking when I slipped on some leaves on an embankment. So I guess I'm celebrating my recovery with a treacherous hike, which makes zero sense, but I'm doing it anyway. There's a monument carved into the rock up there by a man for the memory of his son George Pratt that was killed in the Civil War. Ripley's Believe It or Not calls it New York's Mount Rushmore. So the rock carvings are of Zadok Pratt and his son who died in the Civil War, a horse and a hemlock tree which are used to make leather. Also, Pratt's leather-making tannery is depicted on the rock, the Pratt family coat of arms, a wreath with the names of the Pratt children, and an arm raising a hammer. That's a lot of carving that went on way up here. The rock here is gray sandstone, and it was formed 360 million years ago. Some of the carvings are best seen from below, but here's the horse and the hemlock tree. I learned from the last time I was in this area that the leather industry was huge around here, and the hemlock tree was used in the leather tanning process. Even though it's kind of a hodgepodge of images, it's a unique shrine. I guess you could call it a shrine. There's a lot of rain in the forecast this week in New York and Pennsylvania, so I'm going to ride it out at this campground.